Realignment RK equals Part 1 RK equals. The birth and much of the early history of the Mid-Rim Alliance is still shrouded in mystery. Some of the reasons for this turn of events are obvious. The Clone Wars, the Black Rebellion, and the Second Galactic Cold War that followed saw the deaths of key figures, the destruction of vital documents, or their continued classification. Various conspiracy theories run rampant throughout the HoloNet. They still receive at least lip service by respected politicians helps to obscure the truth. Finally, competing schools of thought about the war push for interpretation of events best suiting their narrative. All of the above makes it very difficult for a professional to find and work with undisputed facts, much less one of the many regular beings who see history as a hobby. The misconceptions and arguments about the Mid-Rim Alliance began from its very foundations and the initial impact it had on the Clone Wars. The Coruscant School, created by Professor Alayna Shepard, from the First Empire University City, postulates that the strategic effect of the Mid-Rim Alliance on the war was relatively minor. She postulates that most intents and purposes, the MRA's military influence in the key campaigns that decided the war was minimal. Further, their economic assistance, while important, was strategically misplaced in a way that still causes more trouble than it's worth. It should be noted that Professor Shepard is a unionist. In her worldview, anything that makes the new order multipolar, instead of a single power block with a singular vision for the future, weakens it. That is especially true in an era when the core regions of the Federated Empire are rivals for power and influence with the Mandalorian Freehold and the MRA. This is a state of affairs only possible thanks to the MRA's actions during the war. The Ariadu School sees the rise of the MRA in a radically different light. Dr. Strictly's Mundus, from the Sebastian Tarkin Military University, holds to the belief that the MRA's rise shaped the galaxy we live in today. It was less through military action, though their contribution on that front was significant, but more through political support for Chancellor, now Empress Kenobi, and General Vale. Indeed, without military and economic support from the MRA, the Mandalorian Freehold might have never risen like a phoenix from the flames of war. Indeed, retaking Mandalore, and cementing General Vale's position as Mandalore the Restorer, would have been impossible without MRA military assistance. Just like the MRA would have been stillborn without all the effort and sacrifices by General Vale and his command during the Mid-Rim campaign, those two campaigns, and the personal bonds of friendship between General Vale and Admiral Tarkin, would lead to an enduring alliance to rival the Imperial Corps. From the rise of the Mid-Rim Alliance, an attempt at honest history vertical bar, by Glenn Meadows, published by Alzacan Military History Journal, RK equals, Royal Plaza, Theed City, Naboo. Foreboding, poisonous clouds gathered above Naboo's capital. The once pristine buildings of the capital, the pride of the best Naboo architects and builders, still showed ugly battle scars. As often as not, collapsed domes and cracked durasteel floors condemned them uninhabitable. Between the blue shadow, and all the poisons released during the various battles that followed, Naboo as a whole was a pale shadow of its former self. The hollowed-out hulk of a separatist battleship still lay in the valley below the city. That particular eyesore was huge enough to provide an avenue of attack that nearly saw Theed collapse once and for all. As things stood, it was a close thing. The capital might still be condemned as too expensive to save. That was all wrong. This was a sentiment that was not unique to the handful of survivors from Naboo's royal security forces. They fought with everything they had. They bled and died, yet it wasn't enough. Dozens, then hundreds of cloaked figures gathered in the Royal Plaza. This was the same place where a decade ago many of them celebrated their liberation from the Trade Federation. Today, it was nearly unrecognizable. Various medical and private aid organizations had turned the place into a combination of a makeshift refugee camp and a mobile hospital. Barricades cut off access to the palace, manned by hard-eyed soldiers. Behind them, poked the guns of Dugin tanks, a sight that should have been unseen on Naboo. That was merely another sign of the times. Some of the refugees stirred and came out of their tents, while others huddled inside, seeking dubious security in obscurity. The cloaked crowd kept growing until eventually, its dubious leader made her way to the front. "My friends, thank you for coming." An amplified female voice carried over the plaza. Some of the soldiers manning the barricades stirred, recognizing it. "We're here today with a simple purpose. We're here to remember all who sacrificed their lives to keep Naboo free. We're here to humbly ask our government to never forget our brothers and sisters in arms. We're here, with a solemn request." The cloaked figure paused, while more and more curious people joined the crowd. For centuries, our ancestors lived and died with their ideals intact. The Republic was there, ready, able, and willing to protect them. Those words sent a stir through the crowd, and would soon shake Naboo to the core. Our ancestors were safe and secure. They lived in a different galaxy. The speaker took a deep breath before continuing. 10 years ago, we should have learned a painful lesson. The galaxy changed around us, it is no longer safe. Our vowed pacifism doesn't make us harmless, so a hostile force could ignore us. Again and again, the Confederacy brutally demonstrated that such high-minded sentiments make us nothing more than victims to be abused. If it wasn't for the sacrifices, blood, and lives of countless Republic and Mid-Rim soldiers, we wouldn't be here today talking. We would be dead, or toiling in Confederate labor camps until our bodies gave up. The voice turned cold and filled with derision, yet, I still hear calls to abandon all thoughts about resistance. I hear calls to spit on the graves of all who made the ultimate sacrifice for our liberty. I hear demands that we turn our backs to our saviors. When I hear such rot, I weep for everyone who sacrificed for Naboo. Is this what we are? A bunch of spoiled, ungrateful children? RK equals Royal Palace, Theed, Naboo. Queen Nietni and her principal advisors gathered in a secure room, while yet another, so far peaceful protest, gathered at the Palace Plaza. "The latest poll results are in," the Minister of the Interior began. "What we're seeing is in no way an anomaly, as many of us knew weeks ago. The days of our people as a whole being pacifists, or believing the idea had any merit, are over. Over 90% of the survivors would be out there, backing that demonstration if they could. That was a demonstration led by a Royal Guard captain. One that flew in the face of what the government still technically stood for. Under almost any other circumstances, Captain Marina Jibo would have found herself drummed out of the service with a dishonorable discharge, if she didn't find herself facing charges first." The Queen narrowed her eyes at the general in charge of her Royal Guard. She had no illusions that Captain Jibo was outside right now, riling up the crowd with his tactic approval. If her sources were right, more than half her government agreed with the sentiment wholeheartedly, with many others supporting it, if not the way it was carried out. Queen Nietni already made a deal with the devil, well with the Sith. Her own hands and conscience were far from clean, yet this is an opportunity. The Navy representative raised a clenched fist. "We finally will have enough volunteers to fill up the rosters of both the Army and Navy." It was no secret that even after the invasion a decade ago, it was the citizens' mindset that crippled any attempts to build up a proper defense force for Naboo. Before the recent disasters, they had a decent force structure on paper, just not enough warm bodies to properly fill it up. The same was true for releasing enough funds for a proper self-defense force. It was a miracle that the Green military Naboo managed to build performed as well as it did. Yet the sad truth was that without massive outside intervention, they have achieved little more than die valiantly. Uncomfortable silence stretched throughout the room. Despite everything that happened, despite the radical changes in society brought by consequent attacks and invasions, very few people on their level dared state the truth. The reason was simple. Doing so would make it that much more real, and impossible to deny any longer. "Naboo is not what it once was," the Queen stated. "We are the servants of our people, and we can all hear what they want. We can either follow the way they want or wait to be replaced." Nietni sighed in defeat. "We've been attacked and hurt one time too many. We have to ensure the security of Naboo, and the protection of our people. We also have a debt of honor to repay to all who came to our aid in our darkest hour." equals RK equals. Part 2 equals RK equals. GAR HQ, Coruscant. Once again, General Valentra found himself wrangling bureaucrats and civilians who wouldn't know logistics if it bit them in the ass. At least this time, he wasn't suffering alone. Right now, a captain from military intelligence was in the spotlight, facing a long, U-shaped table. There sat senators and high-ranked representatives from the most powerful governments and alliances supporting the war effort. They all expected answers and a close to unbiased account of how the war was going, and more importantly, why. By all means, wrangling them should have been either Kenobi's or Vale's job, while Tilar was busy keeping the logistics of the war effort from unraveling around everyone's ears. Instead, he had to deal with one of the many drawbacks of being the supreme commander of the GAR support forces. To the best of our knowledge at this time, it was a combination of factors, Minister. The clone captain kept speaking calmly but firmly when addressing the Alzacan's newly minted Minister of War. First, and I can't stress this enough, there was a pervasive sense of not built here among the various Republic intelligence services. There was outright incompetence and treason as well. We all know that for a fact now. However, that was a secondary factor at the beginning of the war. There was too much focus in the core and mid-rim even as tension rose and civil war became a real possibility. No one was willing to mention certain inconvenient facts in reports that made it to the Senate and the Judaical Forces High Command. Captain, please elaborate. The old human from Alzacan politely demanded. The Trade Federation, elements within the commerce guilds, banking clans, and last but not the least, the Techno Union. Those factions have been building up their navies ever since the Republic disbanded its military. They have been subsidizing worlds and systems in the Outer Rim by offering them modern ships for system defense, in exchange for only paying for maintenance. They have been financing the expansion of local shipyards and military industries to make sustaining their newfound militarized navies easier and cheaper. Long story short, the core factions of the Confederacy had to step in to fill up the void the disbandment of the Republic military left in the Rim, or make operating over their unsustainable due an ever-increasing pirate and warlord activities. Among other things, it was politically unacceptable to submit such conclusions to the Senate, the Chancellor, and high-ranking members of the Republic government. All because the lowered taxes and focus on local defense forces made almost everyone in the Senate and local governments who backed it incredibly popular back home. The Alzacan's minister noted. That was the case with our government, and it was by no means unique. Do continue, Captain. Further, there was an ingrained tendency among the existing intelligence services to dismiss and downplay the danger the CIS could possibly pose. Both people within our intelligence organizations and the Senate perceived the Confederacy as inferior due to the origin of most of their members, or the regions where the more powerful ones primarily operated and earned their combat experience. The danger of the Confederacy's navy was often largely dismissed as that of up-jumped merchants armed with converted freighters. They have often been deemed a threat to barbarians on the Rim or pacifists like Naboo, but of no consequence against any major faction in the core. Such conclusions unintentionally, or deliberately failed to note a few key facts. The CIS program to refit their trade navy and combat ships often produced results more powerful than most ships the Republic designed and built under the still active Reformation restriction. The purpose-built warships the Confederacy built based on modified freighter hulls was something else entirely. The same goes for underestimating the sheer number of ships the CIS had built since the Republic disbanded its military. Realistic conservative estimates of inflicted and sustained losses lead us to paint a grim picture. We believe that until now, the losses we inflicted upon the enemy so far have been largely replaced by local forces, SDF forces, and new construction. So far, there is little indication that we forced the CIS to tap into the large amount of combat-capable ships that they're using to maintain their economy and logistics. In fact, one of the primary reasons the Confederacy didn't overrun us earlier in the war was the logistics difficulties they had in sustaining large enough force in face of stiff resistance. Practically speaking, they could have won early in the war, if their Sith leadership so desired. What allowed us to weather the storm so far was a combination of sustained combat losses, disruption of enemy logistics, and destruction of logistics support hubs in the mid-rim while the GAR pulled back to hold the core. Thank you, Captain. You're dismissed for the time being. Speaking about logistics, General Valentra, please elaborate about their state concerning our war effort and give us your best estimate on the challenges faced by the enemy. This order came from the chairman of the commission, who was a new senator from Kuwait. The Zabrak general stood up and walked around the table until he was facing everyone. At this time, the difficulty of both sides to support major forces beyond our core territories is limited by the destruction of mid-range support infrastructure. Much of said infrastructure was destroyed during the fighting for the mid-rim before the Confederate Grand Offensive. That, or while our forces retreated to better fend it off when they employed scorched ground tactics on fuel mines, refineries, and storage facilities. The Confederacy partially restored some of the said industries in the wake of their offensive. However, they still could maintain a relatively limited amount of forces in the core. The same will be true when we have the forces at hand to assault enemy systems beyond the scope of Operation Starhammer. We will need to rebuild a significant amount of logistics and maintenance infrastructure before we could have sufficient power projection away from the core and allied strongholds in the mid-rim. Valentra paused. Further, sustaining the deployment of Admiral Trench's forces in the core was a tremendous logistics strain on the Confederacy. Without it in the picture, their relative combat power close to home will increase beyond what the successful retreat of Trench's forces implies. The Confederacy employed hundreds, if not thousands of ships to sustain their deployments in the core. Now, those ships will be available for defensive or limited offensive operations, likely aimed at our remaining strongholds beyond the core, which had been cut off for a long time now. In the same vein, without properly restoring a logistics backbone for operations beyond the core, we would be significantly limited in the scope of operations for the time being. Contributing to this is the high number of losses among logistics vessels we suffered during Operation Starhammer and the need to sustain multiple liberation operations all over the core. At this time, the ongoing battles on Corellia itself, and in the Corellian system, are going to be a taste of things to come. We'll have to liberate hundreds of vital core worlds, and this will tie up a large amount of logistics assets and assault ships that could be otherwise used in offensive operations. Practically speaking, with the conclusion of Operation Starhammer, the GAR will be in a need of a rebuild and restore period. For the following months, we'll need to rebuild our frontline combat forces and logistic assets. We need to link up and protect surviving strongholds in mid and outer rim, so we can increase the flow of raw resources to feed our remaining industries, and focus on liberating the core. Realignment =RK Interlude Media Madness 1 =RK Good morning, Galaxy. I'm Sylvia Halcyon, and this is the Galaxy at War. I am happy to announce that Operation Starhammer is about to complete successfully. What's more, our sources in the military confirm the liberation of Corellia itself is ongoing at a good pace, and the rest of the Corellian system will soon follow. GNN's The Galaxy at War. You've heard that drivel, haven't you, my friends? Here's what the government isn't telling you. Corellia has been a bloodbath, the kind hardly seen in this war. I have sources, and they tell me things. The GAR isn't planning any major ground operations beyond the Corellian system for the next 2 to 4 months, if not longer. Further, the GAR is already redirecting all available ground forces towards Corellia. That by itself should be telling you things. The Voice, popular source of alternative news on the Holonet. It's been years, and winning the war is still a pipe dream. All the prices keep going up. More and more jobs are now gone, with those left having ridiculous requirements. How are we supposed to survive now? From an interview with middle-class protesters in front of Coruscant's Ministry of Economy. The Confederate Senate is to vote on a new education bill. The destruction caused by the war leads to the need for engineers of all stripes being at an all-time high. New training and education centers to open on at least 100 worlds financed by the Confederate Council. Shadowfeed News broadcast. Tragedy strikes as Sith-led armada ravages loyal Confederate worlds. Shadowfeed News broadcast. betrayal at Rondon. The local government surrendered without firing a shot. That opens the way for the sinister Sith Operation Starhammer to rape countless freedom-loving worlds. Confederate Council promises retribution, Shadowfeed News broadcast. Admiral Trench successfully evades a Sith trap. Hundreds of core worlds are still under Confederate control, giving the Republic a choice. The GAR has to either cease offensive operations and liberate them or prove itself as nothing more than a puppet for the interests of murderous Sith and Mandalorians. Shadowfeed News broadcast. Fondor is a key Confederate world, and it will not fall. Admiral Trench's pledge upon splitting his fleet during his retreat from the core. Count Dooku still at large. Months after the Jedi uprising, government sources confirm stunning rumors. Shortly before their grand offensive, the Confederacy's new leadership did surrender Count Dooku in Jedi custody to face a trial as a war criminal. Yet, instead of bringing him to the proper authorities so he can face his day in court, the Jedi chose to rise against the elected and lawful government of the Republic. An increasing number of rumors indicate those behind the war were a cabal of fallen Jedi at the heart of the now defunct Jedi Council of Coruscant. Controversial news first spread by The Voice, a popular source of alternative news on the Holonet. We can't comment on the particulars of an ongoing investigation. Republic response to The Voice's allegations. Count Dooku conspiracy has a grain of truth. Confidential sources within the Republic government confirm they believe the Sith did leave Count Dooku into Jedi custody sometime before their grand offensive. GNN Morning News. Investigators working for the Confederate Council confirmed that the Sith, Count Dooku in particular, were behind many of the war crimes allegedly committed by Confederate units early in the war. Some of the crimes reported by Republic media did indeed happen. Who is really to blame? Shadowfeed broadcast. More breaking news from the CC's investigation into the actions of the traitor Count Dooku. The Republic and Jedi created General Grievous during the Huck War when they backed the warmongering Slavers in said conflict. Then the Sith turned him into a rabid weapon and unleashed him upon the galaxy. Shadowfeed broadcast. In a controversial address in front of the Senate, Senator Organa vows that the Senate will investigate Confederate allegations about the Huck War. GNN Night News. Keep Our Republic Secure by Yosuro model gained even more popularity today. It happens among controversy stirred by a leaked report on the raid on Coruscant that saw both the Senate building and Jedi Temple besieged. Protocol and cleaner droids compromised by separatist agents are credited with crippling GAR HQ at the start of the raid by deploying explosives and biological weapons, notably the Blue Shadow. GNN's The Galaxy at War. Bino Doughton creates a stunning sequel to his famous Unite poster. We Are in This Together is a short film featuring hundreds of volunteers from dozens of species, filmed from the moment they volunteered to serve in the GAR and protect the Republic, to their commissioning among the first new volunteer regiments and divisions heading out to liberate the core. GNN's The Galaxy at War. Increased calls to deport non-humans off Coruscant and many other core worlds, because they could not be trusted, by various organization members, threatens a rift within COMPA. Many of the organization's leaders stood up united today to condemn racism in all its forms, and pledge their belief that only united, the Republic could prosper and weather the storm. GNN Morning News. Rampant racism grips Coruscant. COMPA members removed their masks and demanded the expulsion of non-humans from many core worlds. That is another sign of the Republic sinking deeper into corruption under the destructive influence of their Mandalorian and Sith leaders. Shadowfeed broadcast. COMPA's SA group held a controversial rally in front of the Jedi Temple itself. Cruya Vandran opened the rally with strong condemnation of racism. He delivered a scolding speech aimed at former COMPA members, expelled from the organization due to their uncompromising humanocentric views. As if that wasn't interesting enough of a start, former Jedi Ayla Secura was a special speaker. In her first public appearance after Republic authorities cleared her of any suspicion concerning knowledge or participation in the Jedi Rebellion, General Secura appeared in full parade uniform and with a military security detail, confirming the GAR reinstated her rank. She spoke of the need for unity in these dangerous and confusing times. General Secura that hinted the Republic government is hard at work in creating a new organization that would be able to see to the training and oversight of force-sensitive individuals. GNN Morning News. The Republic admits it openly. They're about to replace the Jedi Order with a Sith Order. That is a piece of further evidence that the Republic has fallen, and now we fight nothing less than an oppressive Sith-led, Mandalorian regime. Shadowfeed broadcast. =RK=. Part 3. =RK=. CIC. Republic Cruiser Victoria. Chardan System. The calm chatter of the crew was a stark contrast with what I could perceive through the Force. It was shimmering in turmoil. Light and darkness clashed like the waves of an angry sea. I could almost taste the promise of conflict, bloodshed, and all the other good things that fed the dark side. There was a dark promise of death and suffering on the horizon. I was experiencing a taste of the things to come. I could feel Ahsoka dance on the edge of a blade. She stood in twilight, while the two sides of the Force struggled for supremacy. The light of hope shone upon Corellia. The promise of guaranteed bloodshed tainted it forever. Shortly after transitioning to this system and dispatching scouts, it happened. Ahsoka's dance reached a crescendo. I felt an echo of her pain and anguish. She slipped off the blade's edge and willingly drank of the dark side's poisoned chalice. Then there was only her rage reverberating through the Force as if trying to make its mark upon the universe. Then, Obi-Wan was there, his presence feeling like a soothing blanket. It covered the raw emotions coming from Ahsoka. "What was that, Master?" Arya eventually demanded. "A promise of things to come, apprentice. The war is about to become bloodier. We might need all the help and allies to weather the coming storm, whatever it is." I turned my attention back to the present. There was no trace of Trench's fleet. He either took another way to Separatist territory or an unknown reason pulled back to Fondor. After the Bothan treachery, the Separatist enclave stretching from Elantine to Mon Gaza had multiple more or less secure routes to Hutt space. From there, they could safely reach the other major enemy holdings. If Trench headed that way, he would have taken the hyperlane towards Roma Mul. In that was the case, he was already safe in friendly territory. However, that was not an assumption I could afford to make. The bastard might be playing it safe and betting on preserving as much of his mobile forces for a decisive campaign later in the war. Or he could be bearing down towards the Mid-Rim Alliance with overwhelming numbers. For me, the choice was obvious. I had to head towards Naboo, and later Eriadu, or risk losing precious allies I would need to retake Mandalore. Meanwhile, there were a few issues to deal with in this system. "We've got a confirmation, General. The Chardan shipyards are largely intact. Our scouts detected a significant separatist presence there," Victoria reported. The image in the main holotank changed, showing an array of red symbols. Light yards specializing in building small craft and light transports stood out beside serrated ranks of various smaller cargo ships and 4 Lucrehug freighters. Sensor feeds from our scouts showed a handful of munificent frigates. They were maintaining a loose blockade around Chardan. It took me a few moments to recall that before the enemy's grand offensive, this was the staging ground of the 16th Sector Army, and corresponding naval assets. Before retreating deep into the core, that formation was supposed to leave behind a lot of material to the local loyalists. Some volunteers to aid in training as well. My compliments to Admiral Trent. She's to take appropriate detachments of capital ships and escorts, to secure Chardan's orbitals and contact any friendlies still alive down there. She has permission to utilize limited orbital bombardment if there are appropriate separatist targets on the ground. Admiral Trent did an adequate job of keeping our rear areas clear during Star Hammer. That was especially true considering she I set to fail given the forces under her command. She did join my long shot in chasing Trench, commanding the bulk of lighter SDF ships still with us. The rest of us will continue towards Pax and break through to Malastair, then head towards either Eriadu or Naboo, depending on the circumstances. From Malastair, we would be in communication range of the holonet fragments controlled by the Mid-Rim Alliance. That would allow us to properly evaluate our options for going forward. equals RK equals Kalpha 5, Kalpha system. Hapes Consortium. The sun finally set, plunging the desert into a cool twilight. Stars glimmered in small patches of the sky, almost drowned by the glow of the twilight mists. Master Yaddle could feel the younglings stir. They would be soon ready for the night's chores, and more training. It was a deceptively calm and normal routine. The Force's keening dirge betrayed their current situation for what it was. They were exiles, hiding from the galaxy at large. The galaxy itself bled, ravaged by the flames of war. Good people broke under the strain, and more importantly, the poisonous influence of the Sith. Yaddle could sense how another light winked out. Instead of being extinguished, it plunged into darkness, shattering under impossible pressures and demands. The Fallen Order failed young Ahsoka, just like it failed countless others. It failed the whole galaxy. Yet, it first failed the Jedi and everything it stood for. The approach of a familiar presence brought Master Yaddle out of her musings. Chin Dralig's presence felt almost fragile in the Force, something that hadn't changed since the events at the Jedi Temple. He led the group of Jedi who went to take control of the Security Control Center from the clones. And at that moment, like so many others, he let his fear, and the veil of the dark side lead him astray. Chin returned with hands covered in blood. That was something that they should have avoided. He was another tarnished Jedi Knight, one among too many others. The prematurely aged human sat on the rocky outcrop beside Yaddle. For a few minutes, they stood there in compassionate silence. It would have been great if they could find solace in the Force. Sadly, with the raging ascendance of the dark side, the hiding Jedi lacked even that little comfort. "Have you found a better way?" Chin eventually asked. His voice was rough, like the sand in the nearby dunes. "I can train them to be better warriors, but that's far from enough. It might as well be useless. The Sith didn't need to raise their blades to break us. They evolved and changed. We didn't." Yaddle could freely admit that much, and more. "We've discussed this before, my friend. And we're yet to find out a new way," Chin grumbled. "Perhaps it is not for us to find a new way. Well, I'm old. Steeped in my ways. I'm no spring chicken either." Dralig hummed. "We fought our war and mishandled it in an inimitable fashion. I fear that our younglings will fight the next war, no matter what we do. I'm not sure if we're the right people to lead the way. Perhaps we should offer nothing more than guidance. The Jedi, the Order, we need to change and evolve. The future belongs to the younglings. I'm sad to say that they will have to fight for it. Because we failed them. Our actions and inaction, they tainted us. For there to be a future, the younglings need a clean sheet, free from the baggage we represent." Yaddle thought aloud. "What are you saying, Master Yaddle?" Chin asked. "I'm just an old woman rambling in the night." Yaddle smiled sadly. "We can guide, we can train, but the younglings will have to rise free from the taint we represent to the rest of the galaxy. We lost the right to lead, for it was our blindness and mistakes that plunged the whole galaxy into darkness. We're running out of time." The Force. Dralig trailed off. "We ran out of time back on Coruscant. Those of us still out there, they can do whatever good they can. The rest of us have a solemn duty. We need to help raise the younglings into a new breed of Jedi. They will be the ones who will either bring light back to the galaxy or see it plunge into darkness forever. We have our role and will have to play it to the hilt, my friend. Our war is over. We lost, and the Republic fell because of us. We can mourn it, and everyone who died, and is yet to die in the Sith's wars. As we are, we can't bring it back." "I see." Chin's presence in the Force stilled, almost vanishing as he looked inwards. For a moment, it appeared that he was about to collapse under the weight of accepting their self-inflicting fate. "There's a new dawn coming, after each sunset, isn't there?" Dralig eventually muttered. While his presence was not quite serene, it was slowly getting there. "We'll usher it forth. Together."